please listen carefully.
Well, hello, universe. Welcome to the Optimist Daily Update. I'm Summers McKay.
And I'm Kristy Jansen, and we're part of the team behind the Optimist Daily, making solutions the news. We bring you reader-funded solutions news every day in order to change the tenor of news media and the direction of your day to one focused on solutions.
7 days a week, we publish positive news stories written by award-winning journalists and delivered online to your inbox and through our social channels. And also, we are sharing these solutions in a commute-worthy, walk-worthy, home office-worthy, time for eggnog and winter beverages-worthy podcast. Today is Thursday, the 3rd of December, 2020. Well, Kristy, how are you today?
So I guess it's my internet which is being sketchy today. But other than that, I'm fantastic. And I'm so excited about today's show.
It is kind of a crazy internet day, and I will just sort of preemptively apologize to our listeners. We are having what's known as a wind event here in sunny Southern California. And that has been the catalyst of a lot of the really tragic wildfires over the past years. I happen to live in an area of California that is basically the ocean exit for the Santa Ana winds as they blow through my neighborhood. So my husband and I were up all night battening down the hatches. Our awnings were torn off. Our cute little baby play yards are blown to smithereens. And my animals are running around like crazy things because they're just sort of, this whole house is just trembling and wind shaking. It's kind of unsettling, I will say.
So
the changing environment. This is one of those things that we talk about at the Optimist Daily all the time, is recognizing that there is a shifting of the environment, that we are going to have to live a bit differently, that there are solutions for it. I just feel a bit unprepared, and I need a shift in my perspective today to, maybe think about things that could go right.
Well, you are in luck, Summers, because we've got a fabulous interview for our audience today, and I'm so excited to share this wonderful person with you. We're going to be talking with Vicki Robin. Vicki is an American activist. She's a best-selling author on sustainable living. She wrote Your Money or Your Life, 9 Steps to Transform Your Relationship with Money and Achieving Financial Independence, which became an inspiration for a movement called the FIRE movement, which means financial independence, retire early. She's also touched on food systems, on cultural narrative, and her most recent project is a fabulous podcast, which is titled What Could Possibly Go Right? It's sponsored by the Post-Carbon Institute. And Vicki, on this show, she talks with provocative thought leaders who she calls cultural scouts about emerging possibilities and ways that humanity might step onto a better post-pandemic path. She herself is definitely a cultural scout, and we are so thrilled to welcome her to the Optimist Daily Update. Vicki, welcome.
Thank you. What a great introduction, and it's great to be with you, and I hope that your hatches stay battened down.
Well, anyway, yes. You are in a very similar conversation to what we're working on here, Summers and I and our team at the Optimist Daily, trying to start shifting the narratives away from just talking about the problems, which absolutely have to be recognized and addressed, even to more of an extent than they typically seem to have been. And we're talking about the real problems, the things that are potentially life-threatening for the human civilization, honestly, with climate change and other things. And start thinking about not just talking about them, but focusing on the possibilities and the ways that we may step into a different future. The world has been completely transformed. We've got kind of a reset button that has been pushed. So this is a perfect time to start asking these questions. And I love the framing of your podcast, the way you titled that. What could possibly go right? Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to start a conversation about things that could go right and how you came up with this whole idea?
Right. Thank you for that question. Yeah, I used to call myself a solutionary, that I was somebody who was always looking at sort of reading the tea leaves of the present moment and trying to see, okay, what can we make of this? And basically the backstory is for a thriving, just, and sustainable world. I thought that was our collaborative game here on planet Earth. So when the pandemic hit, I had this is sort of a slightly ghoulish feeling, like, oh, good, there's a crack in the dominant order. something is going to waft up through that crack. If we can capture it, if we can name and claim the emergent possibilities that come when there's a little space. It's sort of like when the concrete in the sidewalk cracks and then suddenly you have a little, grasses and garden right in that crack. So what is going on there? So I started out, my first were called Co-Vita conversations, co together, Vita life. I interviewed a bunch of people, and then I brought the project to the Post-Carbon Institute, where I have been one of their biggest fans for many, many years. And I said, could I do something like this within the context of Post-Carbon Institute so that I can lift up Post-Carbon and Post-Carbon can help me get this word out? Yes. So the answer was yes. And so it was just off the top of my head, this title, What Could Possibly Go Right? And it's designed on the irony of, that sort of ironic question of like, here, I'm going to go do something really stupid. What could possibly go wrong? Yes. So the question just has this little twist in it, but it's also a way of looking. It's a way of looking at the massive data that comes into us daily, filtered through news media that even when they try to be as objective as they can be, are always picking up the sort of the froth of upset from the public sphere, like what terrible thing has happened today that we need to pay attention to. So in that, to look at the other things that are poking up through the froth of the dominant narrative. So, and then I asked people originally whom I knew, and now just we're asking people who we think are very interesting thinkers to reflect. It's a one question interview. What could possibly go right? We ask them to reflect on that from their point of view, and they can speak as long as they want to within that 20-minute frame. So that's the backstory of how we started and where we are. And it's always been experimental, like how is this going and what are we learning? And we're definitely intending to go further and expand this further because of the potency of what we're able to see through our guests. We're not trying to drive the guests in a certain direction. We're just trying to see what they see. And I've started to derive some patterns from what they've told us that's really helping me re-see what's going on.
And I love that. And what you've done is basically reframed the conversation. And by asking that particular question and upending it in a way, it's playful and it's wonderful there. And I just think that's exactly the critique of the media. It's the questions that get asked leave this kind of thinking on the table, right? And it leaves those emerging possibilities on the table. But I want to hear what are the themes that you're picking up? You mentioned a little bit about how you're starting to even shape how you see the world. So what are those main themes and what are those outstanding insights that you have been hearing?
So in a way, I think that the overarching name for it, and I just thought of this morning because I'm just now trying to like pull all these ideas out. The overarching thing is that it's not what's happening. It's not the things, it's the space between the things where all the action is. It's contextual. It's like we get upset about the drama du jour, who said what and to whom and, that sort of thing. But it's more like when I was doing my food work and I realized I was working on local food and I realized that food was not something that was in the grocery store. It was something that I lived inside of. We are food and we live in food. It's a relational world. So I think that's just the overarching thing. And then some of the themes, I don't know if even this is the right language, but one of them is that history matters. History of civilizations, of people's movements, of struggles for justice, American history. I interviewed Heather Cox Richardson, who's one of my...
Oh my God, I'm such a fangirl of hers.
Me too. And so in talking to her and listening to her for this year, I can see the historical antecedents of our moment in time. You start to understand that humanity or Americans or people in my, this community, we've been here before. We've been in this crisis before and we've handled it. And the reason that we still have a United States of America is because there was something in our system. We need to understand what was happening and how it was managed or mismanaged that brought us here today. Because part of the I don't know, it's not just the disturbance of the news, but it's sort of like the distraction. It's like all the action is happening elsewhere, but we're distracted by the headlines. So if you can like expand the historical frame. Also, there's an historical frame of like there's 100 civilizations that have risen and fallen on this planet. So this particular moment in time exists in a larger story. And when you start to look for the larger story, you have a more nuanced and intelligent way to understand where we are. It's less hysterical, less immature. And another one, and it's sort of related, is that basically we're meaning-making machines. Our minds are always trying to take the multiplicity of input and make something of it so we can make better choices. It's like every living being is always doing that. Inputs, is it, friend or foe, threat or food. And so our minds are designed to make up stories. We're outsourcing to the media and our preferred media to tell us what things mean. And so it's just good to look at, like, what is the framework? What is the story within which I am explaining to myself the events of the world?
Right.
The frameworks matter. They matter a lot. And I think that a couple of the things that I would say is, number one, I think it's getting more and more evident through 2020 that the old order, and I know this sounds very trivial, but the old order isn't working. We're basically talking about pulling back the covers and seeing what's underneath there, what's going on under the covers. One of the things we're seeing much more clearly is how the power and money systems work on this planet. Who has power? How did they acquire it? Where is the money flowing? And that we're living inside a story. Goes to my money work, but we're living inside a story of money that has been sort of dominates the Western civilizational project, which has to do with, debt, the enclosure of the commons. We're living inside a story that has squozen out the ordinary person from any possibility of ascending. Once again, we've done this. So I think that framework, we see like, okay, if that's not a framework that's wholesome for us, what is? I think that question is important.
Speaking about that particular framing and talking about money, and which is it's a cultural agreement that we've made, right?
Exactly.
It actually has no value in itself. It's just a symbolic storage of value. And that was one of your insights early on, is that sort of the consumerist, the idea that you need a lot of stuff and you need a lot of income in order to be a good person, a happy person, to have success. That was your early insight with, the financial independence and that thinking that you brought there. So as we were talking about before we started recording, that's one of the reasons that I'm so interested to hear from you, is that you have been pulling back that curtain for decades already.
Right.
Yeah. And I love how you put the idea that we've been outsourcing the making up of stories, or the giving meaning to the events and the things that are going on in the world. We've been outsourcing that to our media channels, whichever ones we choose to tune into, and reclaiming that power to make up our own meaning and stop being sort of just the recipients of that and become prosumers, where we're actually creating our own meanings. I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah, and I think the first question there is, what is the frame through which I'm looking at this?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to jump to like, here's my preferred story. I'm Little Red Riding Hood and I'm in the woods, or like I'm Cinderella. There's plenty of stories like in this pandemic. It's been, and the social justice uprising. We're in the birth canal. We're in the cocoon and we're going to be butterflies. There's so many frames that people are offering to us. But I think the first step is like saying, what is the frame through which I'm looking at this? You could be looking at it as the collapse of Western civilization. You could be looking at it as a breakthrough for humanity. To even inquire as to what is the frame I'm looking through is to start to have power to be a reframer yourself. Yeah, so another principle, I'll see how many we can do without rushing, which is, it's very interesting. And I frame it as solidarity matters. And this showed up in a variety of ways in the interviews, is that part of the old story is the heroic individual, is that you amass power, through your education, through money, you amass power and you then become the heroic leader who saves the day. It's very common story. even the hero's journey. And, back when I heard about the hero's journey, goes forth and, goes for the chalice and stuff, I thought, what's the heroine's journey? Where do we come in?
But even that whole framing that it is an individual, and that's something that I like to, I'm an anthropologist by training and background. And the idea that a single person is the smallest unit of humanity is completely a mistake. Even the family is too small. Really, the smallest unit of successful humanity is the tribe, the clan, the village. That's how you can reproduce yourself. I mean,
precisely.
Or yeah,
Precisely.
I mean, whatever it is. But to think that the single person is really not in relationship, and that seems like what you've been going on. It's the relationships that really are, it's the things between the things, it's the happenings between the happenings, which is all relational. It's
Exactly.
the context. So I think we're running out of time, and I want to sort of bring it back to how we can encourage our listeners to maybe get in touch with some of these ideas so that they can get connected to that solidarity. What can they do to connect with their communities? What can we do to connect with our history? I mean, Heather Cox Richardson, I get her newsletter and I participate in her conversations, and I just think she's a great, we can put that into our show notes because I'd like to get more people following her.
Yeah.
But what other ideas do you have? And listening to what could possibly go right, I think, in your conversation. So Vicki, tell us more about what, as people, you think we can do in our own lives to really get connected to these ideas that you're talking about.
Well, I think in terms of history matters, I'm sort of in a meta level right now in my thinking, but one thing I would say is listen to the podcast because these guests are just amazing. Another thing in this idea of solidarity matters and that, it's not the heroic individual is that, if there's an issue you care about, the first step, I sometimes step into the heroic individual place of I'm going to do something about this, or the discouraged heroic individual is, I can't do anything about this, so I'm not going to even think about it. It's ask, in whose interest is it that this changes? Who's already doing this work? Who or what can I support with my time, talent, or treasure? So in this political era, what I've done, one of the main organizations I've supported is, some of them are the Sunrise Movement, because I'm saying okay, the movement of young people matters. I'm supporting Black Lives Matter, the movement of Black people matters. And they are the experts. They've done the organizing, to be an intelligent joiner and appreciate how hard it's been for all these groups to organize, to be able to offer some clarity into the situation. I've also been supporting something called Movement Voter Project, which funnels money to little grassroots groups that are actually doing the doorbelling. We think about it as the candidates, but it's really the movements. So I think to be able to appreciate how, as an individual, I can put my energy in a variety of ways into the movements that are trying to make things better, not in a positional, angry way, but in a sense power always moves through our society. And if I want something different to happen, what movements can I join with, be in solidarity with?
I love that, the idea. I love that phrase, intelligent joiner.
Yeah,
because
I do too. I think that's such a great perspective, right? Intelligent joiner means that you're not just jumping into whatever the flow is, but you're making a really tactical decision about where your efforts and your energies can have the most output. And you ladies have had such a lovely conversation. I have just enjoyed listening to you, but I wanted to ask just a couple questions if we have time before we wrap up.
I'll cede the floor to you.
Exactly. I've just been sipping my coffee, enjoying your discussion. Well, I was wondering, Vicki, what has been one of the insights or the conversations that was most impactful for you on what could possibly go right?
Right. Okay, that's great. And I'm going to give you two, okay? One of them was on this issue of Solidarity Matters. I interviewed Reverend Lennox Yearwood of the Hip Hop Caucus. He's organizing young hip hoppers to work on climate change. And it's an amazing project of all the things that it does. He's an African American. And he told me that the environmental movement or the climate movement, whatever you want to call it, which is where I've identified, it missed the mark and it could possibly have been a tragic mistake when it did not recognize that the murder of Trayvon Martin was from the same source as the environmental damage that we were trying to address and prevent. That, we did not form common cause with the movement for justice, for racial justice.
Right.
And because we were all tunnel visioned on our single issues, there was for the environmental movement to have responded to Trayvon Martin with, gut level passion would have been, that's the moral moment. It's not just the polar bears. It's the people. Who are at the bottom of the pollution ladder.
Absolutely.
And we miss
environmental justice is often social justice.
Yeah. So, but him saying that we missed the moment, and looking at how tragic it is now 7 years later, how far we have not come. And so another piece of this, the other piece of the moral moment is, I interviewed a woman named Victoria Santos, who's an African American who does, youth education. And I could not get her on the topic of what could possibly go right because her heart is so broken about what could go wrong. And I realized she was not coming from analysis. She was coming from feeling the tragedy of where we are. And I realized so much of what we're doing is so mental. It's just, if we can slap a mental model on something, then we don't have to feel the tragedy.
Right.
And so part of forming common cause with other people, part of solidarity is the capacity of your heart to actually feel what other people are going through. Because one drop of really feeling what's going on, it just makes a huge difference. So I try to do that, like just even reading the news and seeing a picture of somebody like dealing with the latest hurricane. I try to feel like, what would that feel like to stand there
into your
and
compassion.
have my house devastated? So it's important to let our feelings, our empathy, inform our activism and our analysis. It actually emerges as one of the most important things to me.
Well, I think those are two really salient points, is recognizing that the indignation one might feel about environmental justice has to be commensurate with indignation you might feel about social justice. It's a very privileged seat to be worried just about the environment because there are so many challenges. And I'm grateful that the social justice movement has illuminated that. And then the idea of anchoring to your compassion and your empathy. We talk about this with Kristy and the Optimist Daily team a lot, is just like, remember, everyone doesn't think or feel exactly like you. Yeah. And we have to put our heads and our hearts into other people's shoes in order for us to do our jobs effectively at the Optimist Daily. So one last question as we sort of bring this conversation to a close, and we ask all of our guests this, so you might have known it was coming, but what makes you optimistic?
Yeah, I would say that when I take my gaze off of the indignation du jour and I put my gaze on all activity that could be labeled regenerative, restorative, redemptive, anything with a re word, and I see how many millions of people are passionately engaged in working with the sort of for the integrity of nature and working with the integrity of the human soul. How many people are actively doing that? You see how much energy it takes to distort us, our vision, from what is actually already going right. I mean, it's almost like I feel like there's a mindset blindness called everything's going to SHIT. That's the mindset of discouragement and despair, and it makes us weak. And I'm not being la la land about, like 3 little people planting a garden is going to change the world. I'm just saying that people are already tending the garden that is our common home. So many people, and they're working against a tide of sort of a sewage of the mind. Mm-hmm. That says that politicians and money rule the world. They seem to. They rule a lot of choices. They have a lot of power to do a lot of damage. But actually, people are rising up even in the most micro way in their own backyards.
Yeah.
I love that, Vicki, and that's exactly what we're all about at the Optimist Daily is, trying to help people get reattached to their solutions mindset. And when we get mystified by the headlines and all of the awful things, which it's not that they're not happening, but we get disconnected from the other people who already are working on those solutions. And just to echo some of the things you're talking about from your interviews with Reverend Lennox and Victoria Sanchez, solutions are not siloed. Emotions are important in being a feeling human being. And I just want to tell you that I'm full of gratitude for you and what you're doing and all the work you're doing. And I hope that our listeners check out what could possibly go right. And I'm so happy to be on this particular journey with you, Vicki.
Likewise, I feel like you're a sister of another mother.
Yes, soul sister. That was my feeling. Even your interest in intentional communities and things. I don't know. We could talk for probably hours, but we only have these 20 minutes, so I think we have to close up. But is there one last thing? Is there anything you want to leave our listeners with before we close, Vicki?
I mean, I'm sitting here looking out at Mount Baker in the water from my desk, and I would say, to let yourself be silly in love with this beautiful earth that we live on, and with our privilege to have a little patch of lifetime to do something in relationship with this generous, bounteous earth, that leaves the campground better than we found it. It's just to be filled with even the slightest blade of grass that is the vitality of what we actually are. So that would be my benediction.
I love that. Thank you guys so much for this conversation, and thank you to everyone for listening to the Optimist Daily Update. Kristy and I and all of our soul sisters in this journey promise to continue to share positive solution-based stories with ideas on how you can participate in this changing world and ensure it is changed for good. Everybody, we're kind of out of time, so I won't belabor it. Please consider becoming an emissary on theoptimistdaily.com, and for just $5 a month, support reader-funded independent journalism. If you can, help us keep the Optimist Daily free to all who need it, supported by those who are able to. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thanks, Summers, and thanks, Vicki.